What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So I recently looked into the top 10 transfer portal classes this year to see who all was doing the best in the portal, and one team actually kind of shocked me, but in hindsight they really shouldn't have, and that team was Ole Miss. They are currently the third-ranked transfer portal class heading into next season, and they have a great chance to move up even more from there, as they are the leading candidate for Jackson Dart, who is currently uncommitted, but he's a guy who has the kind of talent that can completely change things for a program when he does finally arrive, wherever he decides to go. But like I said, Ole Miss is by far the favorite to land him. So I wanted to make a video talking about why you shouldn't sleep on Ole Miss heading into next season, and why I think that they're going to be a very dangerous team next year, just like they were this past year. So let's start by mentioning how they did last year, and it was honestly super impressive as they ended up going 10-3 with losses to Alabama, Auburn, and Baylor. However, during the Baylor loss, they lost Matt Corral, who was by far their best and most valuable player, and against Auburn, they were down basically all of their wide receivers and a few offensive linemen, if I remember correctly. So there were definitely other extenuating circumstances in both of those losses that don't excuse them by any means, but they give some context to them. Now, the Bama loss was kind of just a letdown because a lot of people thought it would end up being much closer than the 42-21 loss that it ended up being. But looking back on how good Alabama really was last season, that's not a loss to be ashamed of by any means, especially for Ole Miss and where they are currently as a program. That's really not that bad of a loss, even though you wish they would have performed a little bit better, especially with how Alabama was playing at the time. However, heading into next year, after losing Corral, a lot of people seem to think that Ole Miss is going to take some major step back as a program, and sort of go back to being a middling team that they've been in the past before Lane Kiffin got there, but I just don't think so. First off, Lane has done an outstanding job at Ole Miss, and almost nobody wants to play them because at any point they could legitimately go for 40-plus points on you just because of how good their offense is under Kiffin. Now, losing their offensive coordinator, Jeff Lebby, will definitely hurt some, but really not all that much in my opinion, because that offense is undeniably Lane Kiffin's offense. That is his baby. That is what he works on. And regardless of who his offensive coordinator is, he will always be the main factor in what the offense looks like. It's just like a guy like a Kirby Smart with his defense. Yes, the defensive coordinator is important, but it's not all that important comparative to the other coordinator roles because that defense is his. Same thing with Lane Kiffin, but on the flip side, that offense is Lane Kiffin's regardless of who the offensive coordinator is. And to me, at this point, Kiffin has proven that regardless of his roster's overall talent level, he will find a way to consistently manufacture points against almost everybody, excepting maybe the top 5 or so defenses in the country. And even against those, if he has even somewhat comparable talent, he will often score all over them too, which brings me to why I think they will do very well once again next season. If you look at what they've done in the portal, and they have actually more than replaced the talent that is leaving the program other than Corral, and Lane has some very interesting pieces to work with next year, and first and foremost is Zach Evans. Evans has elite-level talent. He was the number 1 running back in his class, and almost everybody wanted him coming out of high school until he had some questionable character issues and off-the-field things pop up. But at his time at TCU, he has shown that he isn't a problem guy for the locker room. He doesn't have any lingering off-the-field issues or anything like that. It looks like it was kind of overblown coming out of high school, and he's sort of proven to be the model citizen of sorts in his time at TCU. And he's shown also why he was so highly regarded coming out of high school. I mean, you put a guy with that talent level into a Lane Kiffin offense, and big things can happen. I also noticed that a lot of people tend to view Kiffin's offense as just a very pass-heavy, quarterback-centric offense, and while to some extent it is mainly and largely based upon the running game, in my opinion. He uses the passing game to stretch the defense both vertically and horizontally, but it's all based upon the running game first and foremost. They run a variety of zone and power runs based out of the shotgun and the pistol looks. They feature the quarterback pretty heavily in the run game as well as the running back, and they blend it very well with the passing game. And it puts defenses in a real bind. They run a true RPO-type scheme. They utilize every yard on the field, and they absolutely utilize the run game a lot more than I think people give Lane Kiffin credit for. he produces really good rushing offenses. And a lot of it is because of how effective the passing offense is, but the passing offense wouldn't be nearly as effective if the running offense wasn't the threat that it consistently is for under Kiffin. Evans can absolutely feast in this exact type of offense with cutback lanes that open up a lot, play designs that are perfectly tailored to his explosive one-cut style of running, and he can also be a legit threat in the passing game, and he's going to make life a lot easier on whoever the quarterback ends up being, both through his ability to run the ball, but also through his ability to be a reliable check down that can make big yardage out of simple passes for whoever the quarterback ends up being. Zach Evans is a huge addition for them. Jordan Watkins and J.J. Pegu, I don't know how to say his name. He's an Auburn transfer at tight end. But anyway, both of them are very interesting pieces for the offense as well. Watkins adds some depth and to the talent to the wide receiver room. And the tight end is a very versatile and athletic guy. He can line up, like I said, at tight end. He can also line up as an H-back out of the backfield. Auburn used him in a variety of ways. He can be a great blocker for you as well, as he's almost 290 pounds, like 280, 285 pounds. He's a huge guy, but he's also very versatile and very athletic. You can use him, in, like I said, in a variety of ways. And, you can put him as a lead blocker. You can use him as an H-back to catch things out of the backfield. You can use him as a true tight end. You can even split him out in the slot every now and then just to create some severe matchup nightmares for people. He can be a really interesting piece for Lane Kiffin to play with. He can be a good safety valve as a reliable dump-off kind of guy. And just an interesting mismatch for Kiffin to play with. There's not a lot of guys that can just match up well one-on-one with him. And I trust that Lane Kiffin is going to put together an outstanding offense, basically regardless of who is playing for them on the offensive side of the ball. Regardless, like I said, of the overall talent level, he almost always seems to put out high-level offenses anyway. And these portal additions are certainly interesting for them going forward. They give him a lot of options and a lot of new toys to play with the offense. Not to mention, if they do get Jackson Dart in the portal, that to me would just solidify them as one of the top offenses in the SEC and in the country next year. But even if it isn't Dart, I'm very confident that Kiffin will find somebody either through the portal or already on the roster to develop. And he's going to put out high-level quarterback play. At the very worst, they're going to be average quarterback. But with Kiffin, I fully expect him to put out above average to elite-level quarterback play, regardless of who they get. And getting a guy with a talent and the ceiling that Jackson Dart has would just absolutely confirm that and put it over the top for me. And that would make me even more excited for them going forward. I fully expect them to land Jackson Dart. And so I almost, in my head, I'm already counting him there. But even if he's not there, I think almost everything that I'm going to say in this video still stands because, like I said, Lane Kiffin continues to put out offenses regardless of who his quarterbacks are. But when you give him a guy like a Matt Corral or a Jackson Dart in this case, things can get really special really quickly. Now then, though, let's talk about the Achilles heel of the Ole Miss football team and basically any Lane Kiffin-led team, and that is the defense. The defense consistently is what costs Kiffin basically wherever he goes, and that has been true at Ole Miss too. Last season, you saw a much improved, though still flawed defense, though, and that should only get better once again into next year. Last year, they only really got torched twice, and that was by Arkansas and Alabama, both of which went for over 40. I think Arkansas broke 50. But in all the other games, they played fairly well, all things considered. I think they only gave up 31, maybe two other times, and it was like 31. It wasn't a high 30s number. All the other games, they were in the 20s or less. And that's really impressive considering where they were before last year. Taking that extra step forward is a huge benefit for them, and I think they're going to continue to build upon that heading into next year. They've added Troy Brown, who's a four-star linebacker coming out of Central Michigan, who should be able to walk in and start inside for them next season despite being somewhat undersized. He is a very good athlete. They also add Hasheem Young as a three-star safety, who should help out in the secondary next year, at least in a depth role. But to me, the real star addition in the secondary for next year is Ladarius Tinson, who's a four-star safety who will almost certainly start for them next year. He provides a very, very physical presence, very athletic presence of the secondary, and in the defense as a whole, he can play up close to the line of scrimmage in a box safety role. He can play a little bit more hash safety. He can also play in the slot to some extent. He's a very versatile, very athletic, and very good football player, and I'm very excited to see what he does there at Ole Miss. Now, I'm not saying that the Ole Miss defense is going to be like 2021 Georgia or anything like that, but they don't have to be. They just have to be good enough to keep teams in those 20s to low 30s range, and Ole Miss can win almost every game at that point. They're definitely not going to be the strength of the team or anything to that level next season, but I do think they're going to be slightly improved from last season, and if the offense is as good as it was last year, or even just very close to as good, then Ole Miss is going to be set up very, very well entering next season. Now, it's obviously still early, but if you look at the roster next year, the only real holes I see on this Ole Miss team next year are currently at quarterback, and that I think will be answered by Kiffin with either Dart or somebody else. And the defense is questionable, like I said, but I think they're going to be much improved. They do have a lot of roster movement happening on that side of the football currently. A lot of defensive linemen transferring out of the program. I think they had 2 corners also leave the program. But they're also adding a lot of guys, and not all of the guys that are leaving the program contributed anyway. I think they're in another year under the system. You're going to get a lot more veteran players there. And I think the defense is going to be just a little bit improved, or at the very least the same as they were last year. And I think that's good enough for Ole Miss to be a competitive team at the very least. Like I said, they don't need to be outstanding defensively for them to win games. They just need to be pretty good. If you look at Ole Miss's schedule next year, then things start to kind of take shape on what their season is going to look like. They draw Vanderbilt and Kentucky out of the East, and that's a very fortunate draw for them because Vandy is basically a guaranteed win. They also have 4 other essentially guaranteed wins from their out-of-conference schedule, and while Kentucky will be a difficult team, they should be very similarly matched, and I think Ole Miss will probably be favored in that game. I think Kentucky's going to be pretty good next year, but I think Ole Miss will probably be a little bit better. Ole Miss, in my opinion, is almost certainly going to be better than Auburn next year. I just did a whole video on why I think Auburn is in trouble next season and going forward, so check that out if you haven't, but that should tell you that I think Ole Miss is going to be much better than Auburn next year. They should also be better than Mississippi State, although that is a rivalry game, so you never really know what's going to happen, but it's another game that Ole Miss should win. And that just leaves Arkansas, LSU, and A&M. I think Ole Miss will be better than LSU next season, mainly just due to the insane amounts of roster turnover that are at LSU right now. Brian Kelly will be in his first year down there. There's a lot of moving parts for him to figure out. But they are a very scary team next year that is very hard to get a good read on. They could end up being outstanding. I'm going to say that Ole Miss is going to end up being better than them right now. This is still very early. But right now, I'm going to say Ole Miss is probably going to end up being a little bit better than them. At the very least, they're going to be very comparable, and that's a winnable matchup for them for sure. Texas A&M is another very interesting team to me, as they will have the talent edge on Ole Miss for sure, especially when you get to the depth. But we never know what to expect from A&M. They've had the talent edge on a lot of teams the last couple of years and still lost to them. That game should be a very closely competitive game. Very tightly matched contest, in my opinion. Although it is in Kyle Field, so that's a tough draw for them. That's a very tough matchup for anybody to deal with. And A&M could turn out to be, outstanding, best team in the West type, or they could be another 9-3 type season. I'm going to say them and Ole Miss are basically even right now. Being at A&M, kind of a tough draw there, but Ole Miss can win that game, and it's not a game that they should just go in expecting to lose. And then Arkansas had a legendary game with them last season. I expect them to be very closely matched again this year as well. That's going to be a very interesting game. This past year was one of the best games of the season. Arkansas is a team I'm very high on next year. I think Arkansas will probably just be just a little bit ahead of Ole Miss, maybe. It's going to depend on what Ole Miss puts together at quarterback, I feel like. But even with Dart, I would say Arkansas is slightly ahead of Ole Miss, but it's a very closely matched game, very competitive, and another winnable game for Ole Miss, even if they don't end up being favored. And then Alabama, they're just going to end up being a notch ahead of everybody else in the West right now. That's probably going to be a loss for everybody in the West, like I said, but Ole Miss, you're going to probably want to chalk that up to a game that will most likely be a loss, but it's not a game that you can't compete in either. It's not like in some years where you just know you don't have a chance. Depending on how the offense pans out and if the defense is slightly improved like I expect, there's a very real chance Ole Miss can be competitive against Alabama. It's not just a game that they're going to get completely blown off the field. Overall, I would have Ole Miss around 3rd or 4th in the West next year behind Alabama, Arkansas, and A&M. However, Arkansas and A&M are basically even with Ole Miss in my opinion, so you could put Ole Miss at 2nd based on where I have them right now. Even if they can just split the games with Arkansas and A&M, they have a very good chance to go 10-2. I'd expect more of a 9-3 as a realistic scenario because they might, and most teams do, lose one game that is a very closely matched game that maybe you're favored in slightly. You're probably not going to win all of those. So 9-3 I think is realistic. 10-2 to 11-1 would be your good scenarios there. And then 8-4 if they underachieve. But the point is that regardless, Ole Miss isn't about to take some huge step back as a program. They're still very much able to compete in the West next season. They aren't going to go anywhere while Lane Kiffin is there. They're always going to be a very scary team to face and a real contender in the division going forward. I think that is very much true for next year. I think it's going to be true for a few years to come at the very least. But next year in particular, I think Ole Miss has a very real shot to compete in the West. I think that at worst, they're the 4th or 5th best team, but that is just worst case scenario, assuming they don't get quarterback figured out and they struggle a lot. I think best case scenario, they're probably the 2nd best team in the West, and I think realistically, they're probably about 3rd, maybe 4th. So another year where they're contenders and just a few bounce of ball plays go one way or the other, and all of a sudden Ole Miss is, 10-2, 11-1, making another New Year's Six type bowl. So that'll do it for this one. Those are my early thoughts on Ole Miss heading into next season after checking out their roster and checking in on the portal. And, I don't think people should sleep on Ole Miss in next year kind of the way that they are. I feel like there's a lot of people who are just expecting Ole Miss to return back to the 6-6, 7-5 type of team that they have been sometimes in the past. I don't see that for them. I think they're going to be a lot better than that. But let me know what you guys think about them down below in the comment section. How good or bad do you think they're going to be? How do you think they match up with the rest of the West? All of that good stuff. Also, leave a like if you've made it this far into the video, as it helps out the channel a lot. And subscribe for more college football content in the future, as I will continue to upload very regularly. And 96% of you guys watching aren't subscribed right now, so it would really help me out a lot anyway. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.